Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to this presentation about an Illinois Know Your Rights presentation related to DCFS investigations. My name is Tanya Gassenheimer. I use she, her pronouns. I am Senior Policy Manager at the National Center for Youth Law. I'm an attorney and a social worker, and I, in collaboration with Thomas, who's with us, and other partners, created this Know Your Rights resource that we will go through with you all today. I will give Thomas a moment to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name's Thomas Edwards. I am a family attorney at the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness, where I work on family law cases and DCFS investigations as well. So I'll kick it back to Tanya. Thank you.
Sure. And a shout out and appreciation to our other partners as we made this resource, Light Collective, LaShawn Etheridge, and Kaylin Jarris, as well as impacted young folks and community members that we partnered with to create these resources. So a bit of an overview of what we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about what a DCFS investigation is and what it means to be under investigation. We are going to talk about legal rights that folks have during an investigation and after. Um, then Thomas is going to walk us through a class action lawsuit, a legal case that impacts anyone who is a pregnant or parenting young person who's currently in DCFS custody. So if that is you, it's especially important to listen into that section. Um, we will have in the description of this video the different sections and how you can jump right to any part that you're particularly interested in. After that, we will talk about the investigation process and the court process, how they're related and different. But it's important to know that they are two separate legal processes. Then we're going to talk about some local resources, local if you are in Cook County. So this material, this information, the legal information applies to you if you're anywhere in the state of Illinois. But the resource sections are almost exclusively based in Cook County, the Chicagoland area. But a note that one of our goals, and we'll be working towards this next year, is to expand and include resources for other parts of Illinois as well. So if you're outside of Cook County, please stay tuned for that. And then we will close out at the end of this presentation to talk a little bit about the potential overlap for some of our community members who may be worried about or facing both DCFS involvement or investigations and or immigration involvement, detention, or any concerns with immigration. And so with that, I will start by just naming generally that our goal in creating these resources is to make sure folks have as much information as they can and have access and knowledge about local resources that they can reach out to for support if you're facing these situations. We think that that puts folks in the best position to achieve the outcomes folks want if they have the legal information and resources. So that is a main goal for this, and we hope this information is helpful. One note about this website generally, just how to use it and navigate it. You can use it on a desktop, laptop, or a phone, any kind of device. And there are multiple pages on it, which you can get to from the bar across the top. You'll see the DCFS process, and it has different pages, resources with different pages, and the definitions page. Those links also appear at the bottom of every page, so it should hopefully be easy to get to whatever page you're looking to get to. So this is the homepage, and if you scroll down, you'll see, again, the kind of two different sections, the information, and then the resource sections divided out by different subjects and sections. So we're going to start with the information sections, first being what is a DCFS investigation and why it's important to know your rights. So if you go to this page, it describes this. I won't read this. Folks can read this at your leisure. But generally speaking, if somebody makes a report to DCFS, which is the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, that they suspect a child is being harmed by abuse or neglect. This is also commonly referred to as calling the hotline or making a hotline call. If someone makes that call, DCFS may decide to investigate that report, which means they would be investigating, and if it's you, whether they believe that you harmed a child by abuse or neglect. And if they do decide to initiate that investigation, it's important to know that that starts a very long and quite complex process that has a lot of legal and other implications, and oftentimes is extremely deeply harmful to you, your loved ones, and your whole community. So it's very important, whether you're facing this type of investigation now or just to know in advance, if it ever happens to you in the future, if it happens to someone you know and care about, the more you know about this information, hopefully the better equipped you can be to advocate for yourself or to support others, and help them get the result, the outcome that they're looking for. And another note is that this system is founded on a deeply problematic history of structural racism, of anti-Blackness, of anti-indigeneity, xenophobia, and white supremacy. And because of that history, it really allows those in power to weaponize this system against various populations. So we believe that it's particularly important for Black, Indigenous, LGBTQIA+, disabled, and undocumented communities to understand this information and these materials, and where you might be able to reach out to for support. And with that, I will move to see again, this is what I mentioned at the bottom of every page. You can go to any of the other pages that are most relevant to you. The next place we'll go is a person's right during an investigation rights. So if DCFS does initiate and embark on an investigation, you have certain legal rights throughout that process. And this yellow box at the top of the page, you'll see this on various pages. This refers specifically to if you are a young person who's pregnant or parenting in DCFS custody, and the class action lawsuit that Thomas will talk about a little bit later. So just put a hold on that for now. You'll see that information on each page, and Thomas will explain more about what that means, what those rights look like for that particular population. But I'm going to talk more generally about, for anyone who finds themselves under investigation, there are two phone numbers on this page. One is case tracking, and that is a number you can call to find out if you are currently under investigation, in case, because it's not always obvious, you might not know. So it's a good place to call if you're concerned or think you might be under investigation. There's another number two to find out if you've been investigated in the past. So even if you don't think you're under investigation now, if you aren't sure if you have been in the past or if this has happened before, there's another number to call to find out that information. And we won't go over this here, but just know that there is a definitions page. So that goes into definitions of various terms you see through these pages. And some of these pages you can even click on some terms. And that is because since these are legal processes, a lot of these terms have very particular meanings in that legal context. And it's not, oh, it doesn't always match what some of these words mean out in regular day-to-day life. So it's important to understand some of these words you might hear a lot and to know what they mean in this specific legal context. So if DCFS is investigating you, you have these rights. So things like to be interviewed within 7 days of when whoever it was made that hotline call, to receive written notice of the investigation within 14 days of that call, and to access information in the report, with the exception of the identity of the caller. So you don't have the right to know who it was who made the hotline call, but other than that, information that's in the report is, you have the right to know what that is. You also have the right to speak with a DCFS worker who speaks the same language as you. I will point out here too that that's another goal of ours moving forward next year. We are hoping to be able to translate these materials into Spanish and potentially other commonly spoken languages. So stay tuned for that. But in terms of the investigation, you do have a right to speak to a DCFS worker who speaks your language. Also, if you work with children and you're worried about that and you're under investigation, you do have rights and certain protections related to your job. We are not going to go in depth in this presentation about those rights, but we just want to flag that. There is a link here on this website where you can find out more information. It's a resource by another organization, Ascend Justice, if you are representing yourself, and it's a manual that goes in more detail about what those protections are. Or if you do find yourself in a position where you can reach out to a lawyer or speak to a legal advocate, you can ask about what's called Dupuis protections. Dupuis was the name of a legal case that outlined some of these protections and rights. So if you ask about that, lawyers should be able to help you know more and learn more how it impacts you given your particular job and situation. You also have rights to give DCFS any information that you believe will help your case, and to give DCFS contact information for anybody you believe would support you and your case. And DCFS then has to talk to those folks. This next section is about rights of refusal, things that you have legal rights to refuse to do. But we say this with a very large and important caveat or disclaimer that it's important to know DCFS can use that against you. And by that I mean they can use the fact that you've refused to do these things to make claims against you in their investigative process, in potential court processes. So it's important to know that and understand that to make a fully informed decision of what you want to do and how you want to handle whether you grant permission for some of these things. So the first one is you do have a right to refuse to speak to DCFS. And they can use that against you, but they cannot use your refusal to speak to them as the only reason that they make any finding against you. You also have the right to refuse to let DCFS into your home without a court order. So if you refuse, DCFS might go to court and get permission from a court to enter your home without your permission. But it is within your rights to make them go through that process or else not let them into your home. Again, similarly, you have the right to refuse to let DCFS interview your child or your children in your home without that court order. So you can require them to go through that process and get the permission of a judge before they're able to do that. But DCFS might try to interview your child or the children in another location. If you do grant permission for DCFS to interview your child or children, your child has the right to have someone else present in the interview. So it doesn't have to be just the child or children and DCFS. During this process, it's important to know that DCFS and this system will not provide you a lawyer during the investigation process. They don't have to tell you that you can speak to a lawyer, but you can. You are allowed to speak with a lawyer if you're able to consult with one, and it is strongly advisable to do so if you can as early as possible. This whole process has legal implications and impacts, as I mentioned earlier. And so the sooner you're able to consult a lawyer, if that is something you're able to do, the better. And they can help advise you or support you, help you understand what is going on and how you can best advocate for yourself. At the bottom of this page, there is a timeline of the investigation process. So I mentioned some of your rights in terms of being interviewed within 7 days. They have to provide you written notice within 14 days. They also have to contact the child and or investigate the home or make a good faith effort to do so within 24 hours. So there are these requirements within the first day, the first week, and 2 weeks. And then in terms of the full investigation, DCFS is supposed to complete the process, make a decision within 60 days, but they are allowed to request a 30-day extension. If they believe they don't have enough information within those 2 months to make a decision, they can request an extension. If they get that, then they get another 30 days. So the maximum amount of time an investigation is supposed to take is 90 days for them to make a decision. During the entire investigation process, if at any point DCFS believes the child is unsafe, they do have a couple of options that impact this timeline and what else can happen. One of those things is they can create a safety plan, which is an arrangement between you and them. It can involve your child being separated from you, staying elsewhere, and it can involve many different things. These safety plans are supposed to be voluntary between you and them, but because DCFS has the authority to take more severe action, it may not and often will not feel voluntary because they can kind of threaten more severe action if you don't agree to it. And that is this other box, what the other option they have, and that is to take what's called protective custody. That is defined on the definitions page, but it basically means DCFS has the legal authority without any judge reviewing it or speaking on it, looking into it. DCFS alone has the authority to remove your child from you, from your home, and decide where the child will stay if they believe there is enough danger. If they exercise that authority, they are required to go before a judge in court within 48 hours. And that triggers a court process, which we'll talk about a little later. But they do have that authority to take that very severe action. And so that is during the investigation process generally. Now we're going to talk about after an investigation. So after DCFS makes a decision and concludes their investigation. So I'm actually going to go to the bottom half of this page and then come back up top. But at the bottom of this page, or this bottom half, you see decisions that DCFS can make, what happens to the records, and how they can affect you. And so this first decision called undetermined, that is if it's been those 60 days and DCFS believes they don't have enough information, that's when they make the request for an extra 30 days. So the decision is undetermined and they have another 30 days and then have to make one of these other two decisions. But if they don't request or need that extension, they will make one of these other decisions within 60 days. One is called unfounded, meaning DCFS has decided, according to their parameters, that they don't believe there's any credible evidence that abuse or neglect exists. Credible evidence is one of those legal terms that has a particular legal meaning, and it basically means that DCFS has found there's enough information for them to believe that abuse or neglect did not occur. So if they make that decision, who can access those records? So for the most part, only DCFS can continue to access the records of that investigation. There are some exceptions in very specific circumstances. One example is that if the child that is the subject of the concern and investigation is involved in other legal cases ongoing at that time, the child's lawyer will be able to access these records. And then again, unless subject to a very particular exception, the child's name and information will be expunged immediately from the records. And expunged, again, it's a legal term that is on the definitions page and basically means the child's name and information will be removed from the record. And if it is subject to an exception, the child's name and information will stay available to DCFS in case of later investigations. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but it's just important to know that a lot of this information, these records, have impacts and consequences going forward, even for future potential investigations. And then if an unfounded decision is made, records generally cannot be used in court or an administrative proceeding, which is a separate kind of legal proceeding, except in very particular circumstances. And those are abuse and neglect or dependency hearings related to the same child, a sibling of that child, or the same person who was accused of the harm, engaging in the harm by abuse or neglect. Then the other decision DCFS can make is what's called indicated. And this is the opposite of unfounded. This means that DCFS believes there is credible evidence, there's enough information for them to believe that abuse or neglect may have occurred. If DCFS indicates the case, then the records are accessible to more than just DCFS. They are accessible to employers, to schools. They'll be accessible to the child's attorney, similar to an unfounded case if the child is involved in other relevant legal cases. And a very critical part of this is the state central register or registry. A lot of folks are familiar with the criminal legal system having registries for different acts that someone is accused of having done or convicted of having done. There is a similar process and entity in this area of the law as well. So it is, if you are indicated, and depending on what it's for, if you don't appeal, and we'll talk about that momentarily, that information can stay on the registry for anywhere between 5, more than 5, or even 50 years. And it that has deeply harmful impacts for folks, and it's a record that can follow them for, as you've heard, a very, very long time. And these records can be used, as I mentioned, by employers, by schools. And so it's very, very important to know that even if the investigation is technically over, even if a court case has never started, there are enormous impacts of having an indicated case. And so it's important to know, and I'm scrolling back up to the top of this page, the rights you have if you have an indicated finding made against you. You have a right to receive a copy of the investigative file, and you have a right to participate in an appeal process. It's an administrative appeal, which is separate. It means it's not court, but it is a legal process. And you can appeal to change the record or even to overturn the finding completely. But very critically, to assert this right, you have to make that request within 60 days, or else you lose that right. So you have to request the appeal within 60 days of the finding, after which a hearing will be scheduled, and you and DCFS both can present evidence to make your cases. And the only way the 60-day deadline might be altered, it will be on hold if you are currently in a related criminal or juvenile legal case. And lastly, you have a right to have a court review the decision made after your appeal process is complete. So I mentioned that this is an administrative appeal process, which is a legal process, but different from court. But if you are not satisfied with how it turns out and the ultimate decision, you do also have a right to have a court actually review the decision and what happened. So that is very, very important information to know. Now, I am going to pass it to Thomas to talk through that class action I mentioned. And this is for young folks who are pregnant or parenting in DCFS custody. And he will talk through what the class action is, what it means, and what is important for you to know if that describes you or someone you know.
Thank you. My name is Thomas Edwards. I am a family attorney at the Chicago Coalition on Homelessness, where we work on a variety of issues, one of which is DCFS investigations and on a lawsuit, a consent decree with the against the Department of Children and Family Services, called the Hill versus Erickson consent decree. And I'm going to talk about that now. CCH has been around since 1980, and we have organizers, policy advocates, and a team of attorneys that work on a variety of legal issues, including this. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time today talking about the Hill versus Erickson consent decree. This lawsuit applies to anyone who is pregnant or a parent who is currently in the custody of DCFS or is in DCFS care. There are additional rights that have been established through this lawsuit that both help and also complicate the life of young people in the care of DCFS when they are impacted by DCFS oversight. So if you're a class member in this case, the Lawproject of the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness automatically represents you, and I'm one of the members of that team. While there are a lot more rights and guarantees for you as a class member that I'm about to get into, I'd also like to caveat that your rights are slightly different, especially regarding the dupuis rights that Tanya mentioned earlier. And that just that difference is largely because you are both being investigated by DCFS, but also you should be being taken care of and provided housing and other supports from DCFS. So things can look just a little bit different for you. That said, if you do start an investigation, it's extremely important for you to reach out to the Lawproject so that we can talk through some things and make sure you're getting the resources that you should be getting and that you're not harmed by the fact that you are a youth in care. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time just talking about the actual rights that come through this consent decree. And the reason is because all of these rights can come together to help ensure that if you are investigated, if these rights aren't being given to you by DCFS, that can help your case. But also just by getting the additional services, it can help prevent investigations in the first place, or that is at least the hope. And some of those rights include the right to information and services about to prevent pregnancy or make decisions about pregnancy and parenting, the right to have an active role in the care and support of your child, the right to receive counseling to help you with any problems you may have, and the right to assistance in learning to be a better parent and in learning to live on your own. Additionally, you have the right to special education services if needing, or tutoring is at home, devices to improve your hearing or speech, or special instructions if you need it, the right to receive transportation to get to school or to the doctor, both for you and your child, the right to receive shelter, food, clothing, and other services from DCFS until you turn 18, or I mean, turn 21, and the right to be free of discrimination based on race, sex, or handicap. A few more rights, the right to get assistance in applying for college or taking college admission tests, and the right to a transition plan, which is a plan that when is done correctly, and the way we hope it is done will help you in leaving DCFS to ensure that when you do leave, you are able to have affordable housing, job skills, and health services, so that you're able to be successful and hopefully not have further interactions with DCFS if possible. So, with all of these things that you can do, what's really important is that you do not have to do these things to have support from DCFS. You're not required to live in a shelter, or leave school because you are pregnant, um, to place babies with relatives while you are in DCFS care, or to stay out of school to watch your child. You don't have to stay in a mental health facility when you don't need mental health hospitalization. You don't have to place your baby with in another household in order to obtain a safe place to live. Um, Again, you don't have to stay in a mental health facility just because your caseworker can't find another place for you to stay. And you don't have to stop receiving services when you're 18. These, I guess, negative rights, or this list is important because you may feel pressure by caseworkers, by DCFS institutions to take these steps in order to make sure that you're safe. If the sole reason that your child is of the abuse and neglect evaluate allegation, that if you're in the midst of an investigation, is because of these things, um, that means they're violating this consent decree, and um, they will basically be breaking the law. And so if you find yourself in these situations, the most important thing is to reach back out to the Lawproject of the Chicago Coalition of Homelessness, and your attorney, if you've been appointed an attorney, to ensure that these rights are actually being implemented by DCFS. There's probably a lot of questions that you might have if you find yourself in these situations, but the main thing that you should take away is that you have the right to be with your child, and that you should be able to remain together and have the supports to take care of you and your child if you are a pregnant and parenting youth in DCFS care. Um, and again, please reach out to the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness, which you will see our contact information at the very end of this presentation. I will send this back to Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Thomas. That's such important information. And again, as Thomas mentioned, if that applies to you, we will have Thomas and his team's contact information at the end of this presentation. Now I am going to transition to another page of this resource, which is a visual timeline of the DCFS investigation process and court processes. So I will talk through this visual generally. I know it looks and is overwhelming because it is overwhelming information. There is a lot happening. It is a very traumatic and difficult thing to be experiencing when you are worried about being investigated and potentially separated from your child. You're worried about the safety of your child and having your child be interviewed and all of these different things. The main thing to understand is that the column on the left of this screen, the darker blue boxes, going down, those that is the investigation process that we have been talking about. Step by step, what I showed earlier in the what happens or what's supposed to happen within 24 hours, within 7 days, within 14 days, and it goes through step by step. What is happening on the right side in the lighter blue boxes going down, this is if a court case is started. So if you are under investigation by DCFS, it is possible that a related court case gets started at any point during that investigation. It doesn't always happen, but it is possible. And if that happens, this is the process of what the court case will go through. And both of these processes can be happening at the same time, which can be very confusing. And it is just important to understand that they are separate but related legal processes. And what I mean by that is that they are separate, so they have separate legal implications. I talked earlier about you have a right to appeal an investigation finding of indicated. That is a separate legal process from a court process and having these court hearings. So it's just important to know that all of these things can be happening at the same time, and you have different legal rights based on which process we're talking about. So if a court case does begin, and there are two ways that can begin. One is if DCFS on its own takes that emergency protective custody that it has the authority to take and then has to go before a judge within 48 hours. That's one way that a case in court can begin. Or at various points throughout the investigation process, or even after the investigation process, DCFS can request that the state file a petition and begin a court case. And either way it begins, the court case will go through these different types of hearings. If a court case begins, that is when you would get appointed and assigned an attorney. That's another key piece of this puzzle, is that during the investigation process, if there isn't court involvement, you don't have the right, you won't be appointed an attorney. And that's part of why we created these resources, these materials, so that you understand what is happening, because you most likely won't have a lawyer at your side through that process. And if you are able to contact a lawyer at that time, that would be extremely helpful as you go through that process, because it also has a lot of legal consequences. But if a court case is started, then you will be assigned an attorney to represent you. It's also really beneficial to talk to a lawyer during an investigation, because if a court case does start, a lot of what is discussed and decided and argued about in court has to do with what has been happening in this investigation process. So it is extremely beneficial to be able to consult with a lawyer or have a lawyer or other representative supporting you or with you through the investigation phase as well. So again, I'm not going to go through every kind of box or detail of this page, but this is hopefully a helpful visual just to get a sense of the multiple things that can be happening. And again, the key takeaway is you don't have to kind of memorize every piece of this, but just know that the investigation and court are both legal processes and they are separate. And so it's important to recognize um, that fact so that you are in a best position to potentially get the support you are looking for or you need through um, either or both of those phases of these processes. So now this concludes the sections of this presentation where we talk about the legal information, um, at least exclusive to DCFS. We'll provide some additional legal information later on. But now we are going to pivot to talk about resources. So again, this is for folks who are in Cook County. Um, all of the information we've discussed so far applies no matter where you are in Illinois, but for the time being, the resources listed here are mostly in and around Cook County. So this will be particularly relevant if you're in those areas of the state. And so you'll see here that we have separated out the resources by section. So we have legal resources, therapy and counseling, resources specifically for youth that cover a variety of arenas. There's also a section on parenting support and supplies, and then food resources. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are hoping next year to expand and have resource sections that cover parts of the state beyond Cook County. So we are hopeful that we can have more folks from more parts of the state able to connect with local resources. But for now, this is for Cook County, and I'm not going to go through every page of these resources. You can take your time, look through, explore, go to the page that feels most relevant to you based on what you might be looking for or are interested in. But I will take a few moments to show the page for resources for youth. And I will pass it to Thomas to jump in here and just kind of describe some of the landscape of what is available and out there for young folks. Thomas?
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. I think one thing that I'd like to just touch on is the term youth. Oftentimes, when we think of the term youth, we think of under 18. But in the context of legal resources and other resources, especially on this page, youth is generally 24 years old and younger, and in some cases up to 30 years old. Um, this page has a whole bunch of different advocates, centers, and drop in places where folks can access resources, support for housing. One thing I really appreciate that Tanya did was able to do with this website was to add little information about what that specific organization does. If you look at Ignite Community Hub, you can actually see that drop-in site offers support with housing, job training, and more. It actually has the ages that they serve, 24 to 24 years old, and that they're experiencing in this specific instance for folks who are experiencing housing insecurity. So that doesn't necessarily mean folks who are literally experiencing street homelessness or living in a shelter, but could mean couch surfing, living with family in different situations. It also has information about you know um, about where they're at, their website, so you can learn more about their services. A way to contact in an Ignite situation, you can text them or even email them with questions. And then there's also a legal clinic at that site that CCH actually participates in on Wednesdays from 10 to noon. That could change after after this recording. So please take time to, check the website to make sure that it's up to date, and maybe even call before you head, especially if you're trying to see a legal clinic. But there's a whole variety of different resources across the city and across the county. So um, take your time to look through. And again, I won't be go through all of these, but I just wanted to highlight that one since it was in front of me. So thank you so much, Tanya.
Sure, of course. And Thomas, did you want to highlight Streetlight Chicago?
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, thank you so much for flagging that. Chicago has a web version and also an app. It is designed for folks 24 years and younger, but it could be used for many of the cases for older folks older than 24. But this app and website has information about how to access food, how to access healthcare, um, and to get other supports. There's also push notifications about um, warming centers and other things, and also a new feature called I guess it's not new at this point, but called Book a Bed. So you can actually see some of the shelters where um, and make sure that beds are available before you go and seek shelter. This is again mainly for people 24 years and younger, but some of the resources can definitely be used outside of that. So I would strongly encourage folks to download that if you or someone you know might be looking for resources in the Chicagoland area. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for talking us through some of those great resources and highlighting some of them. As Thomas mentioned, we encourage you to spend some time with those pages and um, look into whichever ones feel most relevant or pertinent to you or folks you may know. Now we're going to talk about a very important intersection. There are a number of our community members and families who are concerned, very understandably, both about current or potential DCFS involvement and current or potential involvement with immigration and immigration enforcement. And it is important to know that there are resources in that arena as well. And so we just wanted to recognize that that is an ongoing concern for many of our community members. There has been a lot of news and press recently about increased raids by ICE, increased activity in detaining folks and pursuing deportation. We want to name that there has been heightened activity and also that this activity is ongoing. It has been for a very long time. We expect it to continue moving forward. So we want to make sure folks know about these resources, even outside of these last few months or the coming weeks, just to know if uh, any of this were to impact you or someone you knew directly. It's important to know that these resources are out there. And so if someone you know, for example, is in immigration detention and facing deportation, and that person before they were detained was living in Illinois, does not and doesn't have an attorney or a representative, and they meet income eligibility, which here is under, if their household was making under 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, then there is a coalition, a collective of organizations that is supporting folks through these experiences with legal assistance. The larger collective is called the Midwest Immigrant Defenders Alliance. There are various organizations that participate, and we will include all of these links and contact information in the description of this video, so you should be able to access that. A couple of the organizations that participate, for example, are the Resurrection Project, and they have a form you can fill out if you have a loved one who has been detained. There is also an organization called the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They have a phone number and a website where you can find more information. Um, it's also important to note that whether you call the Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights or you fill out the Resurrection Project's form, either way, there are various ways, but it goes to the same centralized system. And they hopefully will connect you with some legal assistance. So you don't have to do all of the different ways, but if whichever one is most accessible to you, you can go that route and know that it will be um, funneled into the same centralized system. Um, there's also a website here where you can see all of the participating organizations. And there are some additional resources included here as well, including a helpline from Beyond Legal Aid. It is a national helpline, but they are an organization that is based in Chicago. And then Organized Communities Against Deportation, or OCAD, they don't, as far as I know, don't do direct legal representation themselves. They do a lot of policy advocacy and other work, but they do have a resource page that is searchable. So that is another place to go and seek out support if you are looking for that kind of support and in need of that. And again, we're showing this slide in this presentation. We will also include the information, the websites, the phone numbers in the description below. And with that, I will pass it to Thomas to speak to another potential option for folks who have these concerns.
Yeah, thank you so much. I Folks who are at risk of deportation or detainment by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol, or even local law enforcement agencies or other federal law enforcement agencies may want to start thinking about what would happen with your child in case of these detainments by one of these agencies. So one option would be to start the process of thinking through a short-term guardianship. This might seem slightly out of focus for this presentation because we're talking about resources around immigration. But the concern is that if there isn't a plan, then your child is at heightened risk of being taken into DCFS custody in these interactions if you don't plan in advance or make what we call a safety plan. So a short-term guardianship is a legal guardianship, legal document that lets someone who's not the parent care for and make decisions for a child. This person does not have to be related to the child. It can be a grandparent, it could be somebody related, but it could just be a friend, someone you know who has agreed to take care of your child in the situation that we've outlined above. It's important to think about who can be a guardian. The person has to be at least 18 years old, be a resident in the United States. Some courts will also often allow undocumented folks to become a guardian, but if there are other options, you might want to think through options beyond someone who does not have documentation. They must be what's called legally of sound mind. They must not be legally disabled and not have a felony conviction that involves harm or a threat to a child. So to create it, what's great about a short-term guardianship is it can only be used for up to 1 year. But the benefit is that you don't have to go to court. You can have the document prepared in case something happens. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking you through what the document is, how to access the document, and some tips to actually filling that document out. To find the document, the best thing to do would be to search. You can use DuckDuckGo, Google, Yahoo, any of the regular search engines to search for the appointment of short-term guardianship form. Additionally, if you want to search in another way, you can look for CFS 444.2, or go to illinoislegalaid.org to find this form. And lastly, of course, you can contact me and I can talk you through getting this form filled out, and at least get the form to you or assist you in filling it out if you need to. Um, the first thing you would need to do is you have a parent or guardian. So you, in this case, you would put your name and where you're living and uh, the name of the child. You have to do a different guardianship for each child. So if you have one child, you would just do one form. You have two child, you do one form for each. If you have two children, you do one form for each children, and so on. The guardian is the person that you would like to become to take care of your child in that case. For the example, we can just say we would like your child to go to um, your brother. So you'd put the name of your brother and their address in that number two. On this one, it's important to check this bottom box that says other and write in something along the lines of on the date that I am detained by ICE, CBT, or another law enforcement agency. The other ones don't apply to these situations. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you're, maybe going into to a hospital, you can also use this form in those situations as well. But I'm just going to be talking through the case of immigration, so that's how I'm talking through this. And then also, you'd want to, when the termination means when the guardianship would end, you would the one I would advise is to on the day which is a year from the effective date, or alternatively, you can write 1 year or when I'm released, from detention. Next, you have to have the you have to sign with two witnesses, and the witnesses have to be two other adults besides you. Sorry, I went too far. And so you would sign that top part at number 5, and the two witnesses would sign in the 6th area. And then the person who is accepting the guardianship, the new guardian, so in this case, your brother, would sign at the very bottom on number 7. If there is another parent, or available, then that person, most likely you wouldn't be doing this situation if you're in that situation. But maybe if you and your other parent are around and maybe both at risk of detainment, then you would have that other parent sign number 8. Of course, if you don't know where that parent is, they're not around, or they passed away, then you don't have to, that other parent doesn't have to sign on number 8. And that's all you have to do. The short-term guardianship can last and can be used for the cases of making sure that your child is able to access health care, that person can make healthcare decisions or education decisions, and maybe a useful tool in preventing DCFS from getting involved. Alternatively, that having the guardianship in place could help in cases where you might find yourself in a situation where you're not in a place to take care of your child, but you believe that someone else could be a good person to take care of your child for a short period of time. Again, everyone's situation is slightly different, so unfortunately I can't give perfect advice. But if you find yourself in these situations and you have questions about um, investigations, but specifically filling out guardianship forms or questions around the Hill versus Erickson consent decree, you can feel free to reach out directly to myself and the other attorneys at the Law Project and the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness. You can email us at lawproject@chicagohomeless.org or call our hotline, which is 1-800 940 1119. I think that concludes the immigration section, and I will send this presentation back to Tanya for closing remarks.
Thank you, Thomas, for that critical information. And I want to mention for this entire presentation, this is not meant to serve as legal advice. As Thomas mentioned, every person's situation is unique. It's different. There are various implications and different things going on. And so all of this is meant to provide general legal information and hopefully let folks know the different options that may be available. Whether any of these options is right for you is a matter for you to discuss with your loved ones and where possible with an attorney, just to make sure you fully understand what the legal impacts can be or repercussions going forward. But we just want to make sure folks are aware of the various options. And so that what our hope is that you and your family, your community can make decisions that expand your agency so that you have as much power as possible to make the best decisions you all can make for yourselves and your loved ones to keep yourselves as safe as possible, um, and with your families wherever possible. And so we will again include this in the written descriptions of this presentation, but for folks who are looking for direct representation or advice, either about the short-term guardianship option, or if you are a class member of the Hill consent decree, which again is if you are pregnant or parenting and currently in DCFS custody, please reach out to Thomas and his team at the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness. If you have any questions or feedback about the materials of the Know Your Rights website and resources, if you have any suggestions, if you have contacts or places you'd like to see connected in other parts of the state, there is a form at the bottom of the homepage of that website that you can fill in, and that will go directly to my team at the National Center for Youth Law. So if any of that applies to you, please feel free to connect with us further and reach out. Otherwise, please feel free to use these resources and materials, share them far and wide for anyone for whom this information might be helpful. And with that, we conclude our presentation and appreciate y'all's time and wish you the very best in navigating any of these processes.